All right. Hello, everyone. Big welcome to all of you. Thank you all for joining us today. The following seminar is brought to you by nonprofit organization iExplore. iExplore is dedicated to providing an extensive online study and communication platform for students throughout the world. I am honored to be introducing our seminar presenter today, Andy, who will be telling us all about the book Tuesdays with Morrie. We will also have a few interactive sections in the seminar, and if you wish to share something during those slides, you may either raise your hand or let me know in the chat section that you want to join the discussion, and I will unmute you. So without further ado, Andy, take it away.
Thank you, Kathy, for her introduction. And yes, my name is Andy, and I am part of the iExplore International Reading Group, and our reading group will bring you more interactive book seminars in the future. Remember to stay tuned to iExplore to find out more. Okay? And of course, without further ado, we're going to get into our seminar for today. And the book I've selected for this seminar is called Tuesdays with Morrie. And there we go. So give me 1 second. I just need to start recording this. Okay, anyway. Okay, let's get started. Tuesdays with Morrie. So Tuesdays with Morrie is a very complicated book. So if you read the title of the book on the front cover, it will be Tuesdays with Morrie, an old man, a young man, and life's greatest lesson by Mitch Albom. So what does this title mean? So the old man is Morrie, the young man is our author, and life's greatest lesson, well, you gotta listen all. So first of all, to understand a great book, we have to understand about the great author that wrote the great book. And the author that wrote this book is called Mitch Albom. Okay? So Mitch Albom was born May 23rd, 1958, and his current age is 62 years old. He is a journalist, writer, and philanthropist. And why did he choose to write a book called Tuesdays with Morrie? It is because his life was an average life, but Morrie made it, let's say, above average. So what do I mean by this? So Mitch Albom was an average student from an average university, and he graduated. And he tried to find some average jobs as a musician, and like most average people, he failed. And then, like most average people, he tried to find different jobs to earn money. And like a lot of average people, he didn't succeed along those as well. And in the end, he ended up being a journalist. And like most average people, average journalists, he devoted most of his time into his work. He didn't spend a lot of time with his family. He he was kind of a recluse. He was just like completely devoted to his work. He didn't care if his life was meaningful. He didn't care if he had like what we call have a life. He just worked. He was like a machine, right? And then his old professor contacted him um after he was like on a TV show, and he started visiting his old professor, and through the lessons that his old professor started teaching him in those visits, he had a new life and he's become a very successful person. So who is this old professor of our authors that has made his life so much better? It is this guy. He's called Morrie Schwartz. He was born 1916 and he died 1995. Okay. He worked as a sociology professor at Mitch Albom's university. Um, he was diagnosed and died from ALS, which is alateral something sclerosis. I'll have a slide on that later. Um, when he was sick with this disease, he had a complete new perspective on life because if you think about it, when a person is dying and his body is slowly shutting down because of disease, he has the most time to think. And he thought about life. He thought about, daily life, what people do in their life, um, the things that society would be better of. And he thought of those things. And he got a lot of answers to those questions from just thinking. And he needed somebody to listen to him. And that is why he found his old student, Mitch Albom, and they had Tuesdays with Morrie, and it turned into this book. Okay, so introduction to this book. I have a quote here. It says, "You talk, I'll listen," he said. I tried doing that in my head, and to my happiness, found that the imagined conversation felt almost natural. I looked down at my hands, saw my watch, and realized why. It was Tuesday. And this sentence was said by Mitch in the book. Okay. So Tuesdays with Morrie is about the story of a young man and his old college professor. His old college professor became his lifelong teacher and mentor. The author of the book, who is technically the main character, started visiting his old professor Morrie constantly after Morrie was diagnosed with ALS. They spent countless hours talking about. Pardon, 1 second. I'm having a bit of issues over here. Okay, yeah, there we go. They spent countless hours talking about life, and Morrie gave meaning to Mitch's life. Okay, so this introduction to the book is kind of vague, and there's a great reason to that. This book is very philosophical, and I want everyone to start having a philosophical mindset when we read this book. So, a philosophical mindset means that when you look at an issue, you don't just think of the practical side of the issue. The practical side of the issue is the side of the issue that you can actually do and solve, but you more think of like the philosophical kind, like the moral kind of this issue. Okay. And after you have this kind of mindset, you understand this book a lot better. And you find that this book is a lot of times quite vague in a lot of areas because, in my opinion, philosophy is vague because it is about the thinking process. And the thinking process is a lot of times not as precise as we want. And now, of course, all this whole story wouldn't even happen without the disorder that is currently now on the screen. It is called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. Yes, it is a mouthful of a disease, and it is quite horrible. So what happens when you get this disorder is it is a progressive neurodegenerative disease that affects the motor nerves. So a person with ALS will experience continued nerve damage and degeneration. So this means is your body's muscles are controlled by nerve cells because these nerve cells can let your brain communicate with your muscles, and after that, your muscles can move. But with ALS, these nerves are degenerating, which means they're dying and they stop working. And this is progressive, which means more and more nerves die as the disease progresses, which means your brain's ability to communicate with your muscles is worse and worse. And what will result in is slowly the person with affected disease is paralyzed. Then in the end, the person will die after the brain stops being able to communicate with the diaphragm, which is the muscle that controls breathing. And very unfortunately, Morrie contracted this disease. And also, by the way, even in today's medical advancements, there is no cure or actual effective treatment for this for this disorder. And the only way a patient with this disease can really do, the only thing they can really do when you catch this completely horrible disease is just try to spend your last years happily and try to take medications to relieve some symptoms like pain that is resulting from constant nerve degeneration and muscle starting to fail. So it's a really horrible disease. And Morrie has this disease. And now we've finished talking about Morrie's disease, I need to tell you guys about the relationship between Morrie and his student, Mitch Albom. So, teachers. Everyone meets all kinds of teachers in their life, right? Some are very nice teachers, like those kinds that give you A's, or those kinds that give you very inspirational lessons about life. Others are not so much, right? For example, in the middle of June, there was a news coming from China about a girl who committed suicide in school after a literature class because her teacher did not understand her, and the teacher yelled at her, and she couldn't take it, and she committed suicide. And look, just because of a teacher's few words, few thoughtless words, this girl who has a whole life in front of her, chose to end it because of the influence of her teacher. And this means that teachers have a huge influence on your life. For example, and teachers can influence your life for the better and for the worse. And for the case of Mitch Albom, he was very lucky. And he was one of the few that found a teacher for life. His mentor, Morrie Schwartz. And Morrie Schwartz really made Mitch's life a lot better. Why? I'll explain in detail later, but look, Mitch had an average life. I already said everything about him is average. He's just living life as a normal person. He's just working every day. He's not consciously thinking about why he's working every day. He just knows that he wants to get money. And if you read the book, you hear him saying that because he was working because he wanted to feel in control of his life. But later, from Morrie's perspective, we'll find out, is he actually in control of his life? Right? There's many philosophical questions in this book. And if those questions are successfully answered, your life is going to become much more interesting than it currently is, because you will be like a person that would actively want your life to be more interesting. I don't know if I understand that, but that's a very good thing. Now, back to teachers. So, anyway, Mitch was more than Morrie's student. Why do I say that? So, as I already said, Morrie was dying from ALS. And during his stage of dying from ALS, he is, his body is shutting down. He can't pursue a lot of the activities that he used to pursue. So, what do? Unlike most people who would spend most of their days mourning for themselves, despairing, and feeling that they're useless and just getting depressed, Morrie decided that no, he was gonna think. He was gonna think about things. And very soon after his diagnosis, Morrie stopped viewing ALS as a death sentence. He stopped viewing death as a horrible thing. Okay? He started after thinking all that time, when he was dying, he had lots of thoughts and he needed to share it with someone, right? And who would listen to a dying man? Would his sons listen? No, his sons were very good people, but they were very busy. Would his wife listen? No, his wife wouldn't even understand. Would his caretakers listen? No, his caretakers won't understand and won't have time. Then who is going to listen? Mitch Albom. Okay? We think of professors as high and unreachable, but are they? So a professor, is a person, he has studied for many years of his life, at least I'd say 20 years. He's called professor. People respect him, right? Or her. And when you go to university, of course, you feel that sometimes, or even in our lives, if you see professor, you'll be like, oh man, he's professor. He knows stuff. I'm just gonna chill, and if he tells me to do something, then sure, but I can't be his friend because he's a professor. He is too high. He knows too much stuff, right? He is very proud, or she's very proud. But are professors all that way? No, they're not. For example, our friend Morrie here. So Morrie was a sociology professor. He, like other professors, he gave Mitch A's during his school year, and he also gave Mitch B's during his school year. They were average teacher and students back then, but when he was dying, when a professor is dying, a professor who had respect for his whole life suddenly finds himself completely out of control of his life and slowly withering away. Okay? He suddenly becomes less of the high and unreachable professor that we commonly think of, and more of a person that would just be your old friend, an old man that you might just go to once in a while on the corner of the street and just talk to, right? And Mitch and Morrie became sort of like friends, okay? They were like, they were always there for each other. Mitch needed Morrie, and Morrie needed Mitch. So, ALS robbed Morrie of everything. It robbed him of dancing. Morrie was a very enthusiastic dancer before he had ALS. Even though he was actually quite old already, he constantly attended parties. And during those parties, he was the star, right? He was like, from our standards, the popular person at parties. Everybody was like, standing around circles watching Morrie with his cool dance moves. ALS robbed him of that. He was also a good swimmer. He constantly went to the pool. He had many friends at the pool. He was a good swimmer too. ALS robbed him of that. ALS deprived him of even the ability to walk and his privacy and many more, right? He never gave up. Even when ALS made it so that he couldn't even go to the toilet alone. Like, you go to the toilet, you can't even wipe yourself. This is the stage that ALS brought him in the end. He still didn't give up. He still decided that he wasn't just gonna waste his time in despair. He was going to teach Mitch all he knew. He was gonna do something positive for the world. Even when he was dying, even when he couldn't even wipe his own behind on the toilet, he still didn't give up. Okay? And he kept fighting this disease, and he kept fighting this disease and trying to use any remainder of his time to do positive things until ALS finally robbed him of the right to live. Okay? The final class. So shortly after, I've already mentioned this, but shortly after getting his diagnosis, Morrie Schwartz made a very important decision. He was not going to hide his illness. He was not going to be ashamed about it. He was not going to be despairing about it. He was going to be very open about it. He was going to face the disease like an enemy, and he was not going down without a fight. And what was his version of fighting? His version of fighting was, number one, of course, he tried to get as much control over his body as possible, even with his disease. And second, the disease was killing him. But before he died, he needed to do stuff. He needed to teach one final class. He had been a teacher, a professor, for most of his life. And when he was dying, he still had one final class to teach. And it was Mitch. And Mitch was his only student, right? The teacher for life. Morrie believed that he should do what he can to positively benefit as much people as he can. You can call this utilitarianism, which let me just explain, means that you believe that you need to do the action that benefits the most people. So, as already explained, ALS is the genetic disorder. So slowly and slowly, Morrie even went on ventilators. He couldn't breathe properly. He couldn't eat properly. He still decided to spend countless hours on every Tuesday talking to Mitch. And especially in the late stage of his disease, when he was at the point where he can't even speak a full sentence without gasping for breath because the disease has weakened him so much. But he still kept going because he believed that with the remainder of his life, he needed to do as much positive things for the people as possible. He was not afraid of dying. He was open to die. He believed that he was dying happily. He was dying surrounded by love. And he wanted to spread this love and to give this love and share this love and share his knowledge, of course, with other people. And who was there to listen? Mitch. Right? So, I'm going to give you guys a scenario. One day, rain was pouring down. Morrie sat by the window. It was Tuesday. Was Mitch coming? It was understandable if he was not. The rain was pouring down, right? And as I'll explain later, it's actually quite hard for Mitch to get to Morrie. And the weather is making it more difficult. Would Mitch actually come? It wouldn't matter if he skipped one Tuesday, would it? Technically, Morrie would understand, of course. It is raining that hard. The door opened. Mitch came in. Oh, you made it. said the surprised assistant of Morrie. Morrie and Mitch were not surprised at all. Why were they not? Mitch came to Morrie no matter what. So here we have a discussion. To visit Morrie, Mitch actually had to take a plane, right? Because if you read the book, Mitch and Morrie weren't even in the same city with each other. They're both in the United States, but weren't in the same city. Which means for Mitch, who I've already explained is actually quite a busy individual, he has to take a plane ride every Tuesday to go to Morrie, spend an afternoon with his old teacher, then take a night flight back to his hometown. Which means he's dedicating every Tuesday of his busy life all the way until Morrie's life ends just to visit Morrie. Why would he do that? This is a discussion. What do you think is the reason that Mitch came to Morrie on Tuesdays, no matter what? What do you think it was his motive? And what do you think was the special relationship that made him do it? So here we'll have the discussion. And I believe if you raise your hand, Kathy should start letting you talk. So I'm waiting for you guys to share some of your opinions.
Yeah, you can also just text me in the chat below to see if you want to share something. Actually, I'll just allow you guys to unmute yourselves. So if you want to share anything, just unmute yourselves and just talk loud. We
Yeah,
really
that is great.
encourage this.
Yep.
We have a shy group today.
Yeah.
Any thoughts, anyone? Any 2 cents on why this is so important to him? All right, since we have such a shy group today, Andy, could you just give your thoughts on this question then? And we'll see if more people will answer later.
That is okay. It is okay that you guys didn't share. So my theory is when Mitch first left the university, Morrie was like, keep in touch, okay? Mitch was like, okay. But 16 years later, Morrie and Mitch hasn't even talked to each other yet. Until that one day, Mitch turned on his television and saw his professor, who had already been diagnosed with ALS, on television talking, of course. Morrie was giving his positive impacts to people. And that moment, Mitch decided that he was going to visit his old professor. And he went to visit his old professor and saw that the once decently physique professor who was once like giving him B's, now a withered old man dying, right? And this old man that was dying had countless pieces of information that he wanted to tell someone. And he asked Mitch to be the listener. And of course, Mitch has the choice to refuse because he's a very busy person, right? But deep down, would you refuse if your old professor who is dying says to you, would you be my listener? Would you be my student for the final class? Mitch wouldn't do that. He was deep down, the very inner core of the human emotion was triggered by the fact that his dying professor was basically asking him for help. And what help? Just to go visit him on Tuesday and listen to him talk and have a conversation. And this isn't too much for Mitch. He'd believe that it was a worthy commitment, and he was going to do it, right? And so, out of deep down human compassion, Mitch came to Morrie every single Tuesday until the end of Morrie's life, no matter what happened. And if you actually read the book, in the end, in the late stages of Morrie's disease, Mitch actually went to Morrie more than Tuesdays. He stayed with Morrie actually like weeks on end when Morrie was about to die. So deep down, Mitch and Morrie formed an unlikely friendship, right? An unlikely friendship separated by at least about 40 years of age. They were like basically best friends for life with like at least a 40 year gap. 40 Here's age gap. So, Morrie was a dancer, he was a swimmer, he was a professor. Now he was a dying man that just won't give up. Why do I keep emphasizing on the fact that he didn't give up? Well, it's because I believe that everyone should be like Morrie. No matter how desperate your life gets, no matter how cruel you feel that the world has been to you, don't give up. There's always something that you can do, right? And just giving up is one of the most meaningless things to do because you basically, like, let's put it this way. Life is trying to get you to give up. Life is your worst enemy. If you give up, you're basically surrendering to your worst enemy. I believe that, we shouldn't surrender. We should always try to claim victory. And even though sometimes victory don't always come to us, we should always try. And that is why we should never give up. Look at Morrie. He was dying, right? ALS was a 100% death rate. There was nobody that survived this disease. He didn't care. The world was very mean to him. They gave him ALS, right? Very few people had this disease. And unfortunately, Morrie was one of them. He didn't want to revenge the world. He didn't give up. He decided to actually use his own positivity, his own careness, and his own love to make the world better. How do I put this? As he tried to make the world better with his own strength, and he tried that. And that is your life's meaning. The meaning of your life, okay, if your life has meaning, it is because you have tried your best to positively impact the world. And you have tried your best to have an impact on the world, not just to, work all day. You have to actually try to help as much people as you can. And that is the true meaning of life, right? You have to have a positive impact. And you have, your life is having meaning when you mean something to the world. By doing all these positive things, teaching Mitch, hosting interviews, even when he was so sick, Morrie was meaningful to the world. And that was why his life was meaningful. Mitch wasn't meaningful to the world. He documented all Morrie's teachings for all of us to enjoy. So that was why his life was meaningful. Giving up will not make your life meaningful. You have to give it a try. Okay, and now, Morrie was dying, but he was not scared. Morrie just is a human, right? He is Homo sapien. He is just like the rest of us. At the time of his diagnosis, he was undoubtedly sad, depressed, scared, and maybe angry, of course. And his illness got worse, however. Morrie changed his perspective. He was dying, but he sees life better than all of us. He believes that he needs to tell someone his ideas, make life more meaningful to as much people as he can, right? So basically, in this book, Morrie told Mitch. Mitch was like, Morrie, do you ever cry? Do you ever let sadness of the disease take over you? And Morrie's answer wasn't never, it wasn't always, but it was, he said, every morning for 5 minutes or so, I allow myself to cry. And then after that, I stop crying. I don't allow myself to cry anymore. My thoughts become positive. Why was Morrie able to do this? Well, look, now we have to emphasize on the effectiveness of having a positive mindset. When you believe that, when you see the positive side of your life, no matter how negative your life actually is, if you let yourself see the positive side, you will never be sad, right? Of course, Morrie is dying, he's losing control of his life, and he is a human. Of course, he's going to have negative emotions. Having negative emotions is perfectly fine. And here, I would just like to encourage everyone that if you're sad, go ahead and cry. Crying is the human way of getting rid of bad emotions. Crying has many health benefits as it helps relieve stress and all that. But anyway, back to the topic. Morrie, his life was horrible, but he allowed himself to see the positive side. He had his student. He had all his thoughts and knowledge, and he had a lot of, and he, in his opinion, he had all the attention he can get from his healthcare workers, right? He sees that his disability, like say for example, not being able to wipe his own behind when after going to the toilet, he doesn't see that as disability. He sees that as, he's going back to being a kid. He's getting all the attention he wants from adults, right? And he feels that he is happy because he's getting a lot of attention, right? So he has adopted this positive mindset in this desperate situation. And that is what allowed him to stay positive throughout this whole illness. At the end of his illness, Morrie went ahead and hosted what he called a live funeral. All of us know that a funeral is hosted after the person is dead, but Morrie had two funerals. Well, technically, his first funeral, he was alive, and he was part of his own funeral. Why that? He wanted to see what his funeral was going to be like, and he wanted to feel that he was dying surrounded by love, right? That was what mattered to him the most. Now, but this is one of Morrie's main teachings to Mitch, and it is don't be afraid of dying. Be afraid of meaningless living. So look, if you die, you are dead. You don't have any impacts on the world, both positively and negative. But when you're meaninglessly living in this world, when you're just a random machine, just like, for example, you write newspapers and you're just randomly writing newspapers about on the topics that you completely don't care about just because it's giving you some money. That is called a meaningless life. You're not being good to yourself because your job is boring you out. You're not being good to the rest of the world because nobody needs your tiny amount of contribution unless you're actually having positive impacts like Morrie is, and you're just wasting resources by being alive. So of course, I'm not saying that you need to be like Morrie. I'm not saying that you need to be a professor first and then start dying and then have philosophical thoughts that have positive impacts. No, no, no. All you need to do is from small things. Try to every day maybe spend 10 minutes thinking about what am I doing today? What will the things that I'm doing today have an impact on the world? What impacts will they have? Do I actually like doing these things today? Am I happy doing these things I'm going to do today? And if the answer to any of those questions is like no, or I'm having no impact, try to come up with ways to make those answers yes, and I am having a big impact. And then your life will be meaningful, right? So now we have a couple more discussions, and I hope more of you will participate in this one. So the first one is modern culture discussion. Should we care about culture and social standards? Morrie's quote was, "Forget what the culture says. What is the big deal?" Right? He said this when Mitch was asking him, "Are you going to be ashamed because ALS has stopped you from being able to wipe your own behind after getting off the toilet?" Because of course, in our culture standards, as everyone knows, wiping your own behind is a thing that is associated with privacy, and not being able to do so is associated with being associated with shame and having no respect for your and you having no respect from other people, right? But Morrie doesn't see it this way, right? He as already explained in the previous slide, he saw it as extra attention. He saw it as going back to being a child. He thinks that who cares what the culture says, right? I'm myself. Why would I care what the culture says? Do you agree with Morrie? Or do you think that modern culture says what it says for a reason and that you should care about it? What is your perspective? I hope more of you share your ideas on this one.
Yep. So does anyone want to talk about anything? I see that Logan, you have unmuted yourself. Would you like to share anything? Yes. All right. Well, since no one is going to share for now, I think I can give a little bit of my personal input for this question, just in my humble opinion. I think Maury is definitely right in that we shouldn't just go by whatever culture says, because that way we wouldn't be actually living our lives. We would just be living as a shell of everyone else's expectations of us. But I think completely forgetting the culture and the societal expectation is something that is insanely difficult to achieve for many of us, because it is so traumatizing for us to not go by other people's expectations, because we might be shamed, we might be criticized for that. So I think we should transcend that mindset and be able to recognize that we are on this world not to follow other people's idealized versions of us, but to become our own versions of what we think is the best versions of ourselves. So I think this book is really nice, addresses the problem, because it is a very prevalent issue in society that everyone is just going by the line of what other people say we should be, instead of living the life the way they want to.
Yes, thank you, Kathy, for sharing your opinion. I totally agree with that, right? So, of course, especially for people that have lived in the States and Canada, you've known that a lot of times your teachers and your classmates and even, let's say, ads by the government is telling you that we're going to preserve like your self-identity and all that. And modern culture standards is definitely not helping in that sense, right? So if you picture a world where everyone is the same, it's actually insanely scary. Think of that. You walk onto the street, and for example, you see everyone looks exactly like Kathy, and everybody thinks exactly like Kathy. That is not going to be a good world. Our world needs diversity. Our world is successful as it is because we have diversity. Everyone has their own thoughts, right? Everyone has their own personalities. That is what is valuable about our world, right? And I'm not saying that we should completely ignore modern culture, as it is very hard to do, because we're not going to be able to change the mindset of like 70 billion people overnight. But I'm just saying maybe like on in your own life, before you do something, of course you have to think before you act. That's something that we all do. But when you're thinking before you act, try to make the part of will other people care about what I do slightly less. Make that impact slightly less. Um, make that a slightly less impact in your actions. Excuse me, because we want to do is preserve your own identity. The world values who you are, right? We don't need everyone to be the same. So, of course, don't be ashamed if you're doing something that goes against modern culture. And of course, especially when you're like in Morrie's case, you're doing something that's against modern culture, and you also have completely no choice in it. You completely don't have to be ashamed because it is who you are, right? Forget about what other people think. You are the most important. Remember that. To yourself, you are the most important. Okay?
Yep, I definitely agree with that. And I think it also applies in the other direction as well, because in today's society, we are, instead of valuing people who are just going by the rules, we're also valuing people who are unique. So that's why we are having this trend of girls calling themselves, oh, crackhead energy, and I'm so quirky, and things like that. So I think not only should we avoid falling into the line of the typical version of like the normal ordinary people, we should also avoid being quirky, quote unquote quirky, just for the sake of being unique to other people. We should be foregoing all those standards and all those limits, and we should just be living as we want to, not as what we think other people want to see. So that's just another take on this.
Yeah, Kathy brought up a great point as well, right? You don't want to do weird stuff and try to be unique just for the sake of being unique. Um, that technically is counterintuitive, right? If you're trying to be unique just for the sake of being different from other people, it is basically the same thing as allowing modern culture to impact you. Because when you're, let me put it this way, when you're actively trying to change who you are, your personality, the actions you do, because of a motive that is related to what other people might think, that is most likely that you're being impacted by modern stigma and culture, right? Even if you're trying to be different from other people, don't just do it for the sake of being different, of course. Who you are is different enough, right? You want to value who you are the most over anything else, okay? And you don't want to change yourself just for the sake of, amusing others or annoying others. Of course, don't annoy other people. That is very important. Thank you, Kathy, for her 2 points. We have some more discussion coming up. I hope that you guys would actually share some opinion, because a lot of this class is actually based on you guys sharing opinions. And if you guys don't share opinions, we might be pretty short on time. So the next discussion is on aging. So on one Tuesday, Mitch goes to Morrie with a question. I'm scared of aging, Mitch goes. What do you think, Morrie? I think being old is actually quite scary because you're being closer to death, right? And you're being old means that you are physically less capable to do stuff. And Mitch also mentioned that on his way to Morrie House, he encountered many billboards advertising the beauty of the youth, right? And he decided that, hey, something fishy going on about that. Do I actually buy this? And at this point, Mitch is using critical thinking to go, is this belief about young people, being young, being better than being old, is it actually true or not? And he decides that who is better to ask than Morrie. So he asks Morrie, and Morrie says he doesn't believe that. He doesn't believe in the fact, in our modern world's viewpoint, that younger people are better. Being younger is better than being old. He says that, Morrie had been a teacher for so long. And a job of a teacher is that he's always interacting with younger people. And through this experience, Morrie says that he has seen so much young people that is facing just so much stress in their life. For example, in school, young people face grades, right? Even from starting from maybe kindergarten sometimes. You're worried about grades. You're worried about what other people think about you. You're worried about does your teachers like you? You're worried about are your parents gonna be mad at you because you randomly did something that is naughty. Okay, you as a younger kid, you worry about that. You grow older, you're worried about grades. You worry about getting to good college. You worry about what you're gonna do when you grow up. And when you're in college, you're gonna be worried about grades, of course. Again, you're gonna worry about does your professors like you. You're gonna worry about are you gonna have a successful life, right? And then when you're actually a young adult, you're gonna worry about finding a job. You're gonna worry about finding a wife or a husband. You're gonna worry about all kinds of stuff. Morrie feels that old people, especially dying old people, those, for example, that's like living in hospices or something, like your grandparents, they don't really have to worry about anything, right? They are being taken care for by their children. All the stress, all the work in their life has been accomplished in their younger ages. When they're old, they have done enough work, they have undergone enough stress to not really have to worry about anything when they're old, right? And also when you're old, if you actually, as Morrie puts it, had a very meaningful life, you wouldn't have the only worry that old people would have, which is regret. A lot of old people would regret, I didn't do this in my life, I didn't do that in my life. But if you actually had a meaningful life, if you think about what you're doing every day for 5 minutes before you go to bed, did it impact anybody positively? Did it make me happy? Um, Questions like that, as I already put before. If you just do that and you make those answers yes, then your life wouldn't be meaningful. It would be very meaningful, and you wouldn't have any regret when you're old. And what that means when you're old, you have basically no stress because old people had nothing to worry about. So this is Morrie's perspective. He says that he doesn't buy the current culture of young being better. He thinks that old is better. I mean, he thinks that not old is better. He thinks that old is not bad, right? Old, you don't have to worry about things. What do you guys think? Do you guys think that being younger, looking younger, is it always better than being older? Which is more better? Not having to worry about stuff, or being more, let's say, physically capable and looking overall better because you're younger. Which is more important in your opinion? Please feel free to share. I hope that some of you actually start sharing this time.
Definitely just unmute yourselves and you will be able to share your thoughts. It can just be one sentence, it doesn't have to be very long. Any thoughts that you have, just speak it freely and we will just base our discussion off of that. It's very helpful if you would be able to just share, even if it's just a few words. You don't, even if you think it wouldn't be correct, because there technically is no correct answer.
I think that aging is actually a very sad thing for um, old people because once they are old, they can't do much stuff anymore, and they just have to lie there and worry about nothing. And I think it's pretty boring to be like that. So I think it's actually very important to enjoy the youth life.
Mm-hmm. So I think, if I am not mistaken, you like the exhilaration of having things to worry about. You like the thought of having things to think about every single day instead of just being soaked in the boredom. Is that right?
Yeah, because this way you won't be so bored and you have nothing to do because I think that's what life is about, to be happy and um to do stuff.
That's true.
Um, yeah, Leo actually brought up a very interesting perspective, which is when you're old, you don't have anything to worry about, but you also don't have anything to do, right? That is very true, but let's look at Morrie. So Morrie, he was old. He died at age 70 something, so he was pretty old by the time he started teaching Mitch. And we know this because ALS roughly takes 1 to 2 years to be fatal. And that means Morrie was at least around 70 when he started teaching Mitch these life lessons on Tuesday, which means Morrie was old, right? And he wasn't just pure old, right? He wasn't an healthy old man. He wasn't even an unhealthy old man. He was an old man that was about to die in a year, right? And during this time, his body is going to be a lot worse than old people of his age because, I already explained, ALS is degenerative, neurodegenerative. It is going to make any kind of a movement on with your body, any sort of like controlling body a lot harder, which means technically Morrie, even though he's about 60, almost 70, roughly around when he died, technically his body's capability is probably about almost a person that's almost 100, right? But was Morrie bored? He wasn't bored. Why? Because he actually thought, he was thinking about things. He was thinking about how he could still positively impact more people, even at that age and even when he was dying, right? He was going on TV shows. Nightline is a TV show. He went on that. He was talking to Mitch, and he was asking Mitch to record him, right? At the end stage of his life, he was on a ventilator. We're probably familiar with ventilators right now because of COVID-19. It's a machine that helps you breathe when your respiratory system is having problems. And Morrie's on a ventilator because of ALS, and he still kept teaching people. He was still doing things, right? And what I forgot to mention is being old doesn't prevent you from being able to do things. Um, you thinking that you're too old to do things, it is what actually is preventing you from doing things. Let's say you have a person that, say, graduated from Harvard Business School. He had a pretty successful life, and then he was 85 years old. is he too old to do anything? I mean, 85 years old. Is he actually too old to do anything? No. His body is weak. His brain isn't. He can put his brain to work, right? He can help his kids with their jobs. He can advise more young people. He can join like volunteer groups. Like he can maybe even start classes to teach young people of his knowledge, his life experience, just like Morrie, and just like a couple of professors that I know of. For example, my very dear friend and professor, Jim Boyd, who has been really helpful with teaching me English these days, right? Like him, he is like 70 something. Is his life boring and meaningless? And is he doing nothing? No, he's like 75 and he's still teaching, right? And you have those, guys, Donald Trump and Joe Biden are like 70 something years old. Joe Biden's almost 80 years old. They're not lying at home on their bed watching TV all day. They're running for president. So being old isn't the thing that's keeping you from accomplishing things. It is the thought that I am too old to do stuff. Don't ever think that you're too something to do something. If you try, you might not succeed. That's how our world works. But you're never too old or too young or too anything to do what you want to do. Give it a try, right? When you're old, and let's say Leo grows up and he was a very good basketball player, for example, and he got old. He is now 70 years old. He can't play basketball anymore. You might say, oh, his life is going to be just lying on the bed watching TV all day, right? Because he was a basketball player. He can't teach people. But he can, right? I've met many basketball coaches that were actually pretty old, but they were still teaching because they still know how to play the sport. And you don't have to be like having a huge successful life. For example, Morrie being a professor, or Trump and Biden being very rich people and politicians, or being a basketball player to do what you can do. Old people, you can help your family by just helping your family, right? Old people can stay home. They can take care of the household, and that's actually quite meaningful. As I really said, young people have a lot of stress. You're making them less stressed by taking care of like some chores when you're very old, some simple chores like cooking and cleaning the floor. Or if you are an educated old person, you can even open some small stores. I know a lot of old people that open small stores and are actually quite successful because their life experience is very helpful. You can help your family members a lot just by talking to them, going, hey, son, when your dad was 30 years old, your dad did this, right? And so, with this problem, when your dad was young, I had this experience, and I think this might be helpful. That's all meaningful stuff that you can do as an old person, right? Never think that you're too old to do anything, because that is the mindset that is actually preventing a lot of old people from still being active and still being helpful. And another example, if you go to Singapore, it's a beautiful country, by the way. You find a lot of old people still actively working at like 80 years old at restaurants and shopping malls because they feel that, hey, why should I stop working? I shouldn't stop working just because I'm old. I can still walk. I can still carry plates. I might not be able to do heavy labor or like highly sophisticated jobs, but I can still work, right? I can still find things to do. I don't think I'm too old, right? We never underestimate your abilities. This is the hidden lesson behind this viewpoint of Morrie's, is like never underestimate your true abilities, right? Don't think that you're too old to do anything. You're too young to anything. You're a girl, so you can't do anything, or you're a boy, so you can't do anything. No. If you want to do that thing, at least give it a try. If you succeed, that means you rose to rise decision. If you don't succeed, try something else. That's just how the world works. Never think that you're too old to do something. Oh yeah, as a quick reminder, if you catch your grandparents just camping out in bed every day and watching TV, doing nothing, tell them what I said, right? Don't think that you're too old to do something. Get them up out of bed. Make them do some house chores to keep them active, keep them healthy, right? Let them talk to them. Ask them about their life experience. Old people, they've been on the planet for at least about like for example, your grandparents might have been on this planet for 7 times longer than you. They're gonna have a lot more experience. Talk to them, get the experience from them. They might not be like Morrie, having so much knowledge and so much experience, but their experience is still gonna be very valuable to you. And in a way, you're making their life meaningful just by asking for their experience because they're positively impacting you. And remember, when your everyday life is positively impacting people, your life is technically very meaningful, right? So that's why, never assume you're too old to do anything. Old is good. You can still do a lot of stuff young people do, and you don't have to worry as much. And the last point about aging I want to bring up is if a 20-year-old that is freshly out of college um, applies to be a businessman, and a 60-year-old man that has been a businessman for 30 years already, and also graduated from the same college, applies for businessman, the 60-something-year-old actually has a higher rate of being accepted because of his experience. Never underestimate old people or anyone at that, right? Always recognize everyone else's abilities and your own abilities. And with that, we're at the end of our seminar. Hope all of you have a successful, meaningful life. If you want more interesting seminars brought to you by iExplore International Reading Club, or just more seminars brought to you by iExplore, subscribe to iExplore Academy's VChat to find out more. Okay? And you have the QR code here. So that's all I have for today. Thank you guys for participating. Hopefully next time, if in a future seminar, you guys will be more interactive. So, thank you.
Yep. And we got a comment in the chat section below that I just wanted to bring up. So Yen said, I think being older is not that bad because people that are young don't have that much experience. So I think that really relates to the point that you were making, that because of that, because old people are older and wiser, we can let them have the positive impact on us by asking them about questions about life and stuff. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up about having a positive impact on people and bringing meaning to your life regardless of your age. I think that is a very powerful message.
Yeah, and I believe that it's a message that's very worth spreading because there's definitely a lot of people that after they're old, they just like giving up on life and they just don't want to do anything anymore because they think they're too old. Never think you're too old. Tell your grandparents that, guys. Don't if you tell them, hey, grandpa, go mop, go clean the house. You're helping me by doing that, and they go, I'm too old. Go, you're never too old to do anything, right? Don't underestimate yourself. And then maybe your grandpa gets up and cleans the room and finds that he is still very fit and he very happy because he now thinks that I'm actually still pretty strong, right? Because he recognizes himself, right? Bring that message to your grandparents, right? Make other people's life more meaningful, and subscribe to iExplore's WeChat group to find out more amazing seminars. Thank you.